Hello and welcome to Manx Radio's General Election Candidate Interview Series. I'm our election producer, Amy Griffiths, and every 5 years the Isle of Man has the chance to decide who should have a seat in the House of Keys. Next month that chance comes round again, and to help you decide who to vote for, we've asked all those standing to take part in a 30-minute interview. Up next is Vicki Hewison, who's standing in Garff. She's been speaking to Phil Gawne.
Falcherugus Rias Kaj and Shea's feed. Today I'm talking to Vicki Hewison, who's standing for the first time in the constituency of Garff. And there's no better way to start one of these interviews by asking you, why do you want to be an MHK?
Well, Moramai, Phil. A very good question. Basically, I've been asked. I think I'm known in the community as being somebody who will stand up and be counted and is not afraid to shy away from harsh topics and maybe controversial ones. So politics is always something that I've followed. I don't think that you can actually be on the island and not have some form of interest in what's going on the island. We're only a relatively small area. I've recently been out, my son's just stood to be a commissioner for Garff, and I was out helping him on the doorstep, and it was very clear that people wanted somebody to represent them, and it is very clear that an MHK does have to represent the people. They have to listen and they have to be approachable, and you have to have trust in your elected representative. And it was really very humbling when people were saying, why aren't you doing this? We need somebody like you to stand up and fight for us. So basically, it's been driven by public demand, I would say.
And you have demonstrated in recent years that you are willing to take battles on. You will do things for the community.
Absolutely. And I've got two classic examples that I have put in my introductory manifesto. And I do have to state we're out and about at the moment. Garff is a huge, huge area. It literally stretches from the outskirts of Ramsey right through to Onken, to Majestic Views, Majestic Heights. So we've got an awful lot of territory to cover. But in my introductory manifesto, what I'm trying to do is give people a feel for who I am, rather than actually going into specific things right at this point in time. People need to know who they're voting for if they've got confidence in that person. So within my introductory manifesto, I do go on to two classic cases of what I've done. It's very easy to say that you can do something, but this is to prove my point. So the first thing that I'm very proud to have instigated is I started up Laxey Lifeline when COVID hit the world. And I like to observe what's going on, and you have to be aware of what's going on around you. And I could see across the world we were having this horrendous things happening in China, in Italy.
And this was in relation to COVID.
Absolutely, with COVID. And it was coming across. And I went to the commissioners and I said, what are we doing? If this hits the Isle of Man, what are we going to do? What have we got in place? And at that point in time, there wasn't really a sense of urgency, possibly because of things that have happened in the past. So when the foot and mouth pandemic hit the UK, we were slightly isolated here, which is a good thing. And we have to protect that at all costs. But I think there was a little bit of a, tradaloo, it'll be right enough, which wasn't the case. So before we actually were in lockdown, we had set up a system where we could go for shopping, where we could collect medication in bulk from our chemists and distribute it in a safe manner for the isolators and also for the volunteers who were doing that. And I'm really proud to have done that. And I have to say, did my household suffer from it? Absolutely. Did I get my walls painted? No. But there was a greater need in the community to make sure that those elderly and vulnerable were cared for. And I'm extremely proud to be part of that.
And of course, the other thing that you did was you engaged in the campaign to keep Cummal Moor open.
Absolutely.
In terms of the the candidates, I mean, Manx Radio has asked each of the candidates what their priorities would be if they get elected. And what you've said is nationally it is the economy, community services and trust in government. And we'll move on to the locally ones later. But tell us then, in relation to the economy, what is it that is a priority about that for you?
So the economy, we really are in quite dangerous times at the moment. You know, we keep dipping into reserves and we shouldn't be doing that. We're embarking on capital projects that run way over and above, the projected figures. And as a businesswoman, I have real issues with this. Now, a lot of people have gone on and said they've managed multi-million budgets. That's fine and dandy. I have a retail shop and I manage a budget, and it might be not multi-million pound, but I know what I spend, where I spend it. I budget and I budget properly. I do all my what's ifs. I do not run over budget. So I don't really think whether you've got a multi-million budget or a smaller budget, it makes any difference. If anything, I would say that I am more clued up to making sure that those numbers work. And like I said, I have a real issue with the way that government is approaching things.
But there is a difference, obviously, between running a government and running a business.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
Obviously, government finances are probably significantly more complex than most businesses, even multi-million pound businesses. There's a huge amount of things that have to be included in a budget, which mean that it is quite difficult to keep an eye directly on every single budget line and to understand how things work. I mean, how do you think that your experience is going to tackle the idea of you put taxes up to pay for certain services to fill the black hole, and then the economy falters, and the next thing is you've got less tax than when you than before you put the tax rate up. So there's all kinds of things like that you're going to have to deal with.
There are, absolutely. And I don't profess to be the greatest economist, but I am very practical, and I will analyse things and I will ask why. If things are going massively over budget, there has to be a reason why, and we have to stop it. Anybody can make an error once, but when it's consistently happening, there is a fundamental problem. Is it the way in how the items are tended? Is it the personnel behind it? There is a fundamental problem. So we have to get to the bottom of that before anything happens.
And I know elsewhere in your leaflet, you do mention somewhere that politicians need to be questioning. Here it is. Question and challenge rather than just accept. I mean, do you really think that MHKs do just accept stuff and allow it to go through rather than challenge it properly?
Yes, I do, because if I didn't, I wouldn't have put that in my manifesto. I do think, or the vibe that I'm getting from being out on the doorstep is, and I speak to a lot of government employees who maybe are not vocal outwardly because they fear that there's going to be repercussions from that. But they do speak to you. And what I'm hearing is that a lot of things tend to go through without there being the proper scrutiny that there should be. Now, from an outsider looking in, that shouldn't happen. And I would expect my MHK to do that. But that's not what I'm hearing on the doorstep. So, yeah, I do think that MHKs do need to investigate more thoroughly in a lot of issues.
There can't be many MHKs who stood on a ticket of saying, well, I'm just going to sit back and let it all happen. I'm sure that all wannabe MHKs, first-time MHKs, or indeed repeat MHKs will tell you that these things are important to them.
But it comes back to proving it, and that's what I've tried to do in my introductory manifesto. You need to prove that you can actually do it. I could say that I could fly to the moon. It doesn't mean that I will do. So I think when you're looking at your candidate, you need to actually look and see, can they actually back up the claims that they're giving you? That's all I would say.
A number of candidates have mentioned trust in government. Tell us, I mean, this was one of your priorities. What do you mean by that?
I do think that possibly over the last 5 years, this current administration, that people have become disillusioned with the government, and I do hear that an awful lot. Why should I actually bother? Why should I actually bother to vote this time? I don't believe that my representative actually bothers that I'm here, that if I do contact them, do they actually come back to me? I mean, I hear that a lot, and that's actually very rude, because ultimately, any politician, it's a job. And my job is to represent my constituency. So if a constituency gets in touch with me, it is my obligation to go back to them. I might not agree with what they say. I might not be able to help them. But I should always go back and acknowledge that they have raised an issue. And I hear that a lot, that is not happening. I also hear that the likes of the recent whistleblowing policy has come out, hasn't it? That's been quite fanfared. Now, again, from speaking to government employees, they do not have confidence that will protect them. So it's fine and dandy putting policies into place, but only if you get buy-in from the sector that it affects. And again, that is not what I'm hearing from government employees. They should have a right to be able to speak out, because ultimately it affects them. It's their workplace. And they shouldn't feel that they can't do that, which, like I say, even though this policy has now gone into place, I'm not hearing that's fit for purpose from their perspective.
One of the reasons, perhaps, that the lack of trust in government exists, if you're right in what you're saying, is that politicians inevitably, because of the challenges they face, have to speak in ways that don't don't declare their hand. You've included a statement a little bit like that in relation to Moorvannon and the Garff Regional Wastewater Treatment Scheme, in which you say that nothing that I've seen or heard on either scheme inspires me to back them at this point in time. But that leaves open the possibility that at some point in time you might change your mind.
And I think a politician's job is to be open-minded. Now, I do feel quite passionately, and I know we're not supposed to speak about this, but I will tell you here and now, one of the first questions I get, and we have been knocking, we don't just post the manifestos through, we've been knocking on the doors. And one of the first questions that we are asked before we even engage in any further conversation is, what's your stance on the wind farm? I can't shy away from that. But what I will say to them is, right here, right now, no, I don't support it. There are too many unknowns. There are coulds, there are shoulds, there are probablys, there are ifs. There are no hard facts. It all seems to be very cloak and dagger. When you compare it to similar things, like the BP has just handed back the lease for Morgan, which is a comparable project which is in Crown Estates waters, and if you like, it's a next door neighbour. One's 1.4 gigawatts, is 1.5. The information that is available for that, it's all out there in the public domain. They have nothing to hide. Yet for the project that we have, MEMA are having issues trying to get the information. So if the examining body can't get the information, how are we, the public, supposed to have any confidence in it? I'm very, very suspicious of the whole project, and that's without the visual impact, the financial impact, the destruction of seabeds.
So are there circumstances that you potentially could support an offshore wind farm? So
what I would say is, and I have said this on the doorstep, if the same deal was on the table for the Isle of Man as they've experienced with Morgan. So purportedly, that's supposed to raise £200 million per year in rental to Crown Estates. Now, if, and it is a big if, that was on the table for the Isle of Man, it would be irresponsible for us not to sit down and give that house room. Some of the issues will still remain, the visual impact, the damage to wildlife, etc. We can't get past that. But because of the financial situation the government is in and is facing, it would be irresponsible to just go, no, I cannot consider that. There is possibly a way that we could get around it. I don't know, but we would have to sit down and have a serious conversation about that.
And the other one, of course, was the wastewater treatment scheme, which is very, very desperately needed in Garff.
Mm-hmm. So I have to be totally transparent on this. I have one of the proposed pumping stations right behind my house. So I am classically a NIMBY, not in my backyard. Having said that, I would still have the same opposition irrespective of whether that was the case. I cannot see the logic in going from Lower Laxey to pump it up through Old Laxey, to get it up to Axenfeld, to treat it, to pump it back down again. It just doesn't compute in my brain at all. The financial implications, we've raised concerns about noise and smell and what happens if one of the 7 pumping stations fails. What if? I went to one of the presentations which took place in Laxey Working Men's Institute, and there is a raft, as with any major planning thing, there is a raft of documentation, but they couldn't get basic information correct. So my house is on Telephone Exchange Road, and we clearly asked them, have you undertaken a constructive assessment of the area? Absolutely. Traffic management, we've followed this. In that report, they clearly stated that Telephone Exchange Road was a single track lane that served the local properties only. That's patently untrue. So if they can't get basic information like that correct, which me as a layperson can clearly see, how am I supposed to have confidence in the technical data they've put in? So,
well, we'll move on then to one of your concerns, and this is about local issues. And you talk about the local bank manager no longer exists at the branch. The branch has closed its doors. The post office services are being cut back. The local church has had its final service. The cafe on the street has just announced it's serving its last cuppa. But you go on to say that many of the problems have been created by a lack of foresight from some government policies. I mean, people don't go to church as often as they used to. That's why churches are closing. People don't use the post office in the way that they used to. They don't use banks in the way that they used to. I mean, these are probably more the reasons.
It comes down to why. So I'll go back to Cummelmore when we were fighting the fight for that. And one of the arguments that the government had was, well, I think the occupancy level at the moment is 25 out of, say, 40 beds. And you think on the outside, you think, oh, that's terrible. There are only 25 beds occupied. Oh, my God, that's not a viable proposition. But then you have to ask the question, why? So in this particular case, in Cummelmore, they had an active policy to block any further admissions. So it wasn't because there wasn't a need, it was because they were being blocked. So you could go to a department and say, well, look, it's nobody needs it. This facility, it's fine to be closed. And I do think the same scenario applies to the likes of the post office, because you can't go and get your pension there. You used to have the My Card. That's been withdrawn. So it's very easy to say, oh, no, the post office, it's not required.
But of course, services like that were withdrawn because fewer and fewer people were using them. And you can't continue. I mean, if you are right, and one of the big issues is the economy and indeed how we fill the black hole in terms of government finances, you've got to look somewhere to save money.
But do you not think that it's just moving a problem from one area to another? So with taking the likes of the post office or having a focal point in the village, so like I say, your churches have gone, so there's no focal point there. The bank has gone, there's no focal point there. Your post office has gone, there's no focal point there. So in effect, we are pushing a whole generation into digital exclusion. And I feel very passionately about this. I have a 90-year-old mother, I have a 93-year-old mother-in-law. And quite often, they are a nightmare to deal with because they do not understand that you can't do this and you can't do that. I've spoken to many elderly on the doorstep, and maybe their only interaction with somebody during the week was going to the post office, maybe to post a letter to their niece or somebody, or to go and get their pension. Now they have literally nothing. And it is a well-known fact that social isolation leads to increased dementia. So are we not potentially pushing that problem onto an already strained health service? There is a real problem in the government, as I can see it, of silo mentality. This is my area, this is my area, this is my area. And we need to actually look in a more conjoined way that if we do this, the knock-on effect for other areas in the government. And I really do feel very passionately about that. You can probably tell because I'm getting very worked up about it now. But I do believe that generation, we are letting them down and letting them down badly, whether it be health or social services.
OK, then, what are the steps that you would take to reverse some of this? So
for something like that, I do think it's quite easy to give something back. I would want to see some form of like digital hub, something that it could maybe only be once a month or maybe once a fortnight. It is not beyond the realms of possibility for government to work with commissioners to go, OK, we will have X hall and there will be an officer there who can help you do your car tax online or even print something off. It's not rocket science. It's just a little bit of compassion and humanity for, like I say, a very, very vulnerable area of our society. My real concern is that you will get somebody who is so baffled by it all. They will have maybe a cleaner. Now, please, all cleaners, don't think I'm tarring with the same brush. But they might have somebody who comes in. They're not very familiar with them. And they will maybe hand over their bank cards to do something. They are subject to vulnerability and exploitation. And we can't have that happen. We have to make sure that they are protected.
We'll move from the very local then to the very big picture stuff. I mean, you talk about an economy that creates and supports opportunities for all. How are you going to, or what are you going to do different, I suppose, to deliver that?
I do think we've got a huge issue at the bottom of the tree. So for our youth, again, another doorstep issue is my grandson or my son, they don't see that they've got a future on the island. They can't get the training they need, or perhaps possibly they have had the training and there's been issues in the workplace and they've gone to work overseas or in the UK. There's issues with housing. So with the likes of the training, we have a great training facility at UCM. We have the likes of Hills Meadow. Also, if you look at the skills shortage list for the island, there are so many vocational trades on that, from plumbing, joinery, electric. And it says it's a medium skill. That's the level that people are required on that. So why don't we just up the ante? Offer increased training facilities on the island. Have something where the youth of today can go, OK, so I do actually see I've got a career progression. We've got AI coming in at a rapid rate of knots. And we have to question what's available in school. Is it sufficient for modern day needs? Are we actually teaching the right subjects to prepare people to go forward? Now, without a shadow of a doubt, I think Andy Burnham's just touched on this recently. We can get the march on the UK if we act swiftly and up the ante with our training. But he's identified that youth training for vocational skills is key. You have to do that. That is something that AI will not take over quickly. And we know there are shortages there. So that's quite a quick fix.
And it is a quick fix that government's been working on for 5 years. And there is a skills champion in government who's working hard to try and identify where the gaps are and fill those. So that's one of your solutions to creating that economy that supports opportunities for all. But is there anything else?
There are a lot of things available. I've recently attended a Future of the Economy lecture, which was hosted by the Chamber of Commerce, a great organisation, I have to say. And there was a very interesting speaker, James Kingston, who was outlining digital opportunities that are available to the island. Now, he's Manx born and bred. He goes to lecture he has his own business in the UK. He goes to Jersey and to Guernsey and to speak about these things, about how the Isle of Man can actually take advantage of these. Tokenisation, I think, was one of the things that he touched on. Now, I have to confess it's something I am not familiar with. But I think what we have to do in areas like this, which are fast moving, we do need to go to experts like him who have the experience and understand it inside and out and go, OK, what can we do? If there is an opportunity, we need to grab it, and we need to grab it quickly, because the modern world does move at a rapid rate of knots. And it is slightly a concern I have of the government that it's a little bit antiquated and doesn't move quickly enough to grab opportunities.
So how do you change that? How do you get governments to move more quickly? Because obviously government is constrained by a whole load of bureaucracy.
Absolutely.
Introduced primarily to ensure transparency and fairness.
You say that, but are we that transparent? I don't know. I think over the past 5 years I would actually argue against that. So again, it's one of these things. If you introduce a policy, is it actually working? Is it fit for purpose? I would argue that a lot of the people on the doorstep are going that the government isn't transparent. So that bit, maybe we need to address that again.
So you would basically, are you saying we introduce more measures to make the government more transparent?
We need to tweak what we have. We need to make sure that it's fit for purpose. I haven't examined it thoroughly, so I don't really know. I can't give you a definitive answer on that. But I do think it needs to be looked at. And I would just say probably tweaking. And obviously speak to the people that it affects. And the people who have to work with it. Because, 9 times out of 10, if there's an issue, if you go to the root of the problem, not necessarily the top of the tree, that the managers who implement it, you go to the root of the problem and you ask them, what are your issues? What is holding you back from doing this? 9 times out of 10, you will get a really clear idea of where you need to go with something and where the issues lie.
One of the other things that you mentioned is driving on roads with potholes and then noticing unnecessary resurfacing work on rural roads. I mean, do you honestly think that roads get resurfaced if it's not necessary work?
Marine Drive, that's all I'll say, Phil. It's happened that there is no earthly reason. That is not a through highway way. Why did that happen? Somebody somewhere should have turned around and go, why? This is a spend. I mean, you're talking, I believe it was around about £100,000 just in materials. That's without labour. That's crackers. We've got roads that are far more deserving to have that piece of tarmac put down. So why? It's a case of why. Why weren't people standing up and go, this is not right. Should not be happening. So,
and yet, probably not even a year ago, Charles Gard made a very well watched video which demonstrated very clearly that there was significant neglect of that area, which was a great tourist spot. So I'm guessing that the department had responded to the criticism they'd received.
Without talking to them, Phil, I honestly don't know. But it wasn't the whole of it. It was only part of it. So I really don't know. We would have to ask them. Okay.
Then we could move on to you say here, as an island community, we could and should do better. And I think you've given some indications and hints to that. But most MHKs would say the same sort of thing. They would say that that's entirely what they've been trying to do. I mean, what specifically would you like to see done better?
Oh, a very good question. So many things. I think we need to listen. The MHKs need to listen better, and they actually need to listen clearly to what people are saying, because I don't think that's always something that that is addressed.
And sadly, I've just noticed the clock. We're almost out of time. Can you, in a nutshell, tell us why people should vote for you?
Okay, so voting for me, I am going to be honest. I'm going to be outspoken. I will be transparent. And I will listen to the constituents, and I will take your concerns forward. And that's really, I'm not going to sell something that I'm not. I really think that a vote for me would be a very positive one, and I will work with any constituency and also the commissioners to make sure that Garff is very clearly represented.
That was Vicki Hewison, who's standing for election in Garff. Also standing in the constituency are Anthony Allen, Sean Bostrom, Daphne Caine, Aishlinn Creer, Peter Kermeen and Martyn Perkins. You can listen back to this interview along with all the others recorded as part of this series shortly after broadcast from your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the upcoming election, just head to our dedicated election website, which you can find as always at manxradio.com.